Jimbo. Everybody looks at me, Jimbo Simmons. I'm a Choctaw from Oklahoma. Our original homeland was Mississippi. I look at what happened in Oklahoma, and of course the statehood and the relocation. It was just the removal, not just the Indian people, but a relocation of the old South to Oklahoma. And that's how we see it today. And that's how we're dealing with, that's how it's evolving today with the state of Oklahoma, with the governor. And Oklahoma, it's a Trump state. There's a lot of Indians that will vote Trump. There's a lot of our people that believe in that American way of life. Our philosophy of life, our way of life is just as valid as any other in the world, but it's not recognized. And I think that's where our alliances begin. And it even today is a result of what our brothers and sisters fought for. And I'm not just talking about the Indian wars, but more currently. And I always say this too, if it hadn't have been for our brothers and sisters and the warriors of Wounded Knee, many of us won't be here today.
I'd like to ask
a lot
my
of this
brother
work,
Craig to stand up, please.
And I want to recognize our brother up there, Craig, who was one of our warriors that did go to Wounded Knee and still with us here today. So we're witnessing the work that's happening here. Here, we're here talking about our alliances. Our youth are over there talking about what's our next step, emerging. And we have our elders, some of our elders there, guiding them in that way a little bit. But for me, of course, part of the American Indian movement, you know, I left Oklahoma when I was 17 years old. And I went to boarding schools. And I was in the military. But I ended up in California. And I met many members of the American Indian movement. And it was their education and their understanding of this war that we're involved in. And that's how I began to educate myself. And I remember there were times I went to some gatherings where our elders were. And I would get up and I would talk and, you know, be loud. And that wasn't it. And I had some teachers that said, well, we just have to be more patient. And that's what it was, being patient. But through my journey, it took me to many, many areas, many communities, not just as American Indian Movement, but also as a member of the International Indian Treaty Council. And it was also involved in some of the groundwork of the work that we were doing in the international community, the Bora, that I call it. And a part of this work was a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. Yes. And that's what part of the work that we're dealing with today in the global communities. What are the commonalities that we all have as indigenous peoples of the world? Sometimes I have to refer that to that declaration, because I said in some of those meetings, and I was there, over those 30 years that it took for us to bring that declaration forth to the United Nations to approve of it. You got to understand too, many of our elders and traditional people and spiritual leaders that did go and had their input there. And some of that input was very strong. And it contradicted what some states and some countries wanted. For example, self-determination. Self-determination is a human right. Also, if it's a human right, then we have a right to resist. And so, understanding that, and at that time, many of our people that were there within that system, United Nations, and learning, that's what we begin to understand about liberation struggles. What is our relationship to all of our brothers and sisters around the world? And of course, for some of us, it was the Irish people, the Irish, the Palestinians. At the time, Nicaragua, Guatemala. These were all in our time. And we had to show our solidarity. And so for some of us that were beginning to understand this, knew that somewhere along the line we had going to have these kind of alliances. And for me, being a Choctaw, realizing that someday I had to go home to Oklahoma. And when I did go back to Oklahoma, probably a little bit more than 5 years ago, there's an issue that was taking place, and it's water. And it had to do with the Kiamichi River. And I have to say that in that meeting there were probably over 400 or 500 people, all from different walks of life. And of course me, I was reluctant to say anything, simply because, I knew that in Oklahoma, they don't want to hear that stuff. And then when I got up to explain that I was at Standing Rock, what took place at Standing Rock, how we protected the water, and the need for us to really bond together. And that's all I had to say. And then later, some young people started coming up and started talking and said, we need to listen more. We need to listen to this. And I didn't have to say too much. And then I got involved with the community that was really fighting this water. And the Kiamichi River runs 177 miles from the Arkansas, Oklahoma, up mid-Oklahoma, all the way down to Texas to the Red River. Well, on that river, they want to build what they call a pump-back facility. And they call it green energy. Well, if you study what back pump and how that is developed, it does not fit what our community wants. And this had been going on for some years there. And we just recently won, again, a denial by they denied it, a permit. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission denied the people that wanted to build this facility. This is the third one that they had. And it's not over, because they got till 2017 to keep going. And so that's where we're at right now. And what really brought it to a point is that eminent domain. They wanted 30,000 acres. That 30,000 acres affected 500 families living along the Kiamichi River. And it was there that and we got a letter too. My companion and I got a letter in the mail, because we live at less than probably 400 or 500 yards from the Kiamichi River, and we live down maybe 8 miles from where they wanted to build this back pump facility. Well, if you know the history of Oklahoma and the water issues that our people had to put up with, they weren't very strong in those first negotiations. So we have to step back a little bit and look at some of those policies that were implemented and how it's affecting us today. So this is, to me, one of the very examples why we need to really find our voice, speak up when we can, because you don't know where our allies were. You don't know who those people could be. And if you remember many of our wars, we had allies. The Cheyennes, the Crows, the Choctaws, all of them. We all had allies. And that's what, to me, the term that we really need is, what is allies? And so, I think, and I really want to thank Movement Rights for bringing this forward in the context of laws of nature. Because that's basically what it is. The law of what we call natural law. So what we're just emphasizing is those natural law that our people looked at, and how we based our way of life, our sovereignty, they're still here.
sovereignty is a term of the state. The state being the government, the federal government, right? It's a term of the state. Its origins come from the Catholic Church. Y'all want to go way back and dig that out, you can do that research, but its origins come from the Catholic Church, right? And giving kingdoms the sovereignty to hold and claim land, right? That's where that came from. And so when I was writing, I was thinking about, for me, sovereignty is the state saying you are a people. We're gonna work with you, right? You're sovereign. You're a sovereign. Independence is we are a people. We're a people. This is what we say. This is who we are. This is what we look like. What our culture is. How we want to be. Independence is we are. We just are. Whether that's in relationship with you or not, or you're not. And I think we're trying to get there. And all of those things do build on each other and support each other. I'm not bashing sovereignty, well maybe a little bit, but I'm not all the way bashing sovereignty, because it is what we're using to hold on to what we have and to push the federal government to do what they're supposed to do according to their laws, right? And so that's an important piece. And so I think, when we're looking at the ways and the opportunities of building unlikely alliances, that is in red states, that's in middle America. I do a lot of larger people of color environmental justice work, and I always tell people man, there's lots of stuff going on the coast, over here and over here. Don't forget us in the middle. Yeah. Don't forget us in the middle, because the most regressive laws are being tested and voted on in the middle states, right? When the immigration law that happened in California years ago, right? And there was a lot of work, that had already passed in Oklahoma with hardly even a blip. Nobody even noticed. It was dude, that's already a thing in Oklahoma. And so, I think strategy-wise, we have to think about one, what do we need to be in relationship with someone? But also, what can we give to be in relationship to someone? And I think this piece around land and sovereignty and government to government relationship is an important giving to other communities that they don't have, right? We're a very small population nationwide as Indian people, and African Americans, Black people, they have a much bigger population, but they don't have the government to government relationship and land relationship with the federal government. There's an opportunity to build on that, right? And so even when I think about conservative white folks in Oklahoma, I'm always okay, if I was at a picnic with them, what would I sit and talk about with them? Right, and I have been very intentional, particularly on social media, about not bashing people who have voted for who's in the White House right now. Because to call them insane and crazy and delusional, those might be things I've been thinking about, but that's not what I say, because I'm there may be a time I have to be in relationship with these folks. And I don't want to have to apologize for calling you an idiot at some other time, right? I'm rather all right, I'm just not going to say that. Because I think when I think about Oklahoma, what's happening in Oklahoma, I have to be in relationship with a lot of other communities to get the stuff done that we need to get done. And that means talking to landowners, landowners, wherever they're at, I'm all right, how can we be in relationship and support each other? But also I think moving into thinking about relationships internationally as well. So for me, when I think about rights of nature, it's both what's happening at home, but it's also happening in other communities, and there's relationship there to build on. But it also is an opportunity to learn from their movements, learn from their liberation movements like Jimbo was talking about, and to build on that. Because at some point, and I think that time is coming soon, we may have to move as a block in a really serious way.
As Shannon said, so I work with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. I also work with movement rights. And in that role, I work with a lot of partners in Ecuador Ecuador became the first country in the world to recognize rights of nature in its national constitution, as Shannon said, in 2008. Since then, they've brought over 70,000 rights of nature cases to court there. Many of them they have won. One of the most iconic and precedent-setting case that they've had is the case of Los Cedros. It was a constitutional court case that was brought in 2021. Los Cedros is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. It's a 17,000-acre primary cloud forest in northwestern Ecuador, and it's home to hundreds of rare and endangered species. I had the honor, as Shannon mentioned, of being able to visit there last year with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and I can tell you firsthand, this place is alive in ways I have never experienced, with plants growing on other plants, with bugs so loud you can hardly hear one another talk as you walk through the forest. Even with glow-in-the-dark spiders and fungi that we got to see in the nighttime. It really is a place of unique biodiversity and beauty. Yet despite being designated a protected forest, Los Cedros, like many of our public lands here, was not really protected. Agriculture and cattle grazing was prohibited since it was a protected reserve, but extractive industry was not. And in 2016, the Ecuador government granted mining concessions to the state mining company UNAMI and a Canadian partner, Cornerstone Capital Resources. These concessions that they gave were going to cover over 2/3 of the forest reserve and threaten to cause irreversible damage in search of copper and gold. Local communities, scientists, national and even international allies came together and filed a lawsuit arguing that the mining would both violate the rights of nature there and the collective right to prior consent. In 2020, Ecuador's Constitutional Court, which is their highest court, like our Supreme Court, took up the case. In December 2021, the court delivered a historic ruling. It found that mining in the Los Cedros protected forest violated the constitutional rights of nature. The ruling stated that no activity threatening the rights of nature can take place now within that forest, not mining or any other extractive industry. It ordered, Ecuador shows us, it feels far, but it shows us what's possible. It ordered the government to revoke those mining concessions in Los Cedros, but the court went even further. It clarified that rights of nature applies not just to protected areas in Ecuador, but to the entire territory, to the entire country. So rights of nature cases can be brought anywhere in the country. This was really a watershed moment. It not only protected the forest, but it created a legal precedent that now strengthens the enforceability of nature's right throughout the country, and I would argue throughout the world. Many courts in other Latin American countries use this case as a precedent when rights of nature cases are brought there. So this victory and this movement, as many people have spoken to today, is growing. From the Cucama woman in Peru who won the recognition of the legal rights for the Marañón River, were recently awarded here in the U.S., to communities in Spain who secured the rights and the restoration of Mar Menor, which is the largest saltwater lagoon in Europe. So Shannon mentioned over 200 now rights of nature laws, ordinances that have passed around the world in over 39 countries. I think this just makes sense. So thank you all.
Like, look at you changing this oil, it's crazy, I buy pipelines, and they're like, well, you need oil. I'm like, no, we don't. Don't you know? You should know, Henry Ford, his first automobiles ran off a hemp field. You're an auto mechanic, you should know that. Whole body was made of hemp steel, which is 1,000 times stronger than the steel we use today. I am outraged. You know how many lives we could have saved using better steel? Hemp puts nutrients back into the soil. It cleans water. Anything made out of plastic can be made out of hemp. You could build houses out of hemp. You could heat your houses out of hemp. Why aren't we using hemp?
You can't make the money on it.
Exactly. You had the oil barons, the cotton farmers, the wood producers who used racism to make hemp illegal. And where are we today? We're all suffering because of it, And if we have that respectful relationship with hemp, that can provide jobs for infinite generations to come. Could feed us, house us, clothe us. All we have to do is have that respectable relationship with it, you know. And then we're going to talk about the women and the water, you know, Enbridge, KXL, and partners. But, you know, as soon as I start saying that's the hooker, you deserve to be paid more. Why aren't they paying you more? They're hooked. They're listening to everything I say, you know. And so, trying to make that connection, because I don't care who you are. I don't Republican, white man. You know, you could be the richest man in the town. I'm still going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you about fossil fuels. I'm going to talk to you about hemp. I'm going to talk to you about rice. I'm going to talk to you about indigenous lifeways. Because indigenous nations have thrived on this planet since time immemorial. You know, right now, since the settlers came over, because of the monoculture and the industrial farming, we have 50% less nutrients in our topsoil. Make it make sense. Leading cause of death for European Americans, heart disease and cancer. Wild rice helps fix cancer and heart disease. Leading cause of death for indigenous women, homicide. You can't come at me with nothing no more. I'm more likely to die than you, sir, so you're gonna have to sit here and listen to me. Even though I know you don't care about my life, I'm still gonna take the time to inform you and educate you. Because the majority of us around the world have been indoctrinated to think these colonial ways, individualism, you know? So I don't care who you are, we are all relatives. We are all deserving of the truth, of that education, to know that indigenous lifeways and wisdom will ensure that every single being, including Mother Earth, is taken care of for infinite generations to come. You know? And so when I talk about education, when I talk about canvassing, when I talk about talking to people, even if you don't like them, giving them a chance, you know, it's important. It's important to sit down and have those conversations. When I'm talking to these politicians about wild rice, you know, these politicians come back like, oh, we need the mining. We need those jobs. But no, we don't. Those jobs only last 50 years. And I myself, I go talk to those miners. I talk to them when they're sober. I talk to them when they're drunk. I don't drink myself, sober 5 years. The message is always the same. How are we supposed to provide for our families? What can you provide for your family right now as it is? That job's only going to last you 50 years. Do they even pay you a respectable wage? No, they don't. Let me tell you about vital resources that we already have that we should be utilizing. Let me tell you about how large indigenous civilizations thrive since time immemorial, cultivating the land and farming the land without using any pesticides, without taking any nutrients out of the soil. We did that. And look at what you guys are doing to the land now. You know, and when I talk about land back, I always make it a point to be like, you know, it doesn't mean give us our land back and go back to Europe. As much as I would like that, I have a lot of European allies that I love. I'm half European myself. So, you know, am I supposed to have me go back to Europe? But that's not what land back is about. Let's give it back to indigenous nations so we can fix it, so we can prepare it, so we can instill that knowledge and that wisdom. We don't need this Western civilization anymore. We don't need these Western ways of thinking. They had over 500 years and look at what they've done. You know, so I don't care who you are. You could be changing my oil. I had some construction workers in my house this weekend, or this past week, and I kept them an extra 30 minutes. You know, they only made $16 an hour. Of course, that's how I started. And at the end, they're like, yo, you're right. Let me tell you how you can start educating your family. You can start talking to every single person you can.
One of the things that we found out is words. One of the success that we've had is just words, how we use words. So in North Carolina, there's a lot of people who are wanting to conserve and they want to do these things because they love the Haw River. One of the politicians from Alamance County, he wrote a whole bill about a trail beside the Hall River. And I was like, okay. And so when I was actually going to lobby for another organization that I worked for, we were talking about the PFAS, or the really bad chemical that comes off of like Teflon and water resistant materials, has gotten into our rivers. And so we were going to talk about PFAS, and they needed to write a bill and pass it. So I so happened to have taken my husband with me to go into the General Assembly. And when I was talking to the politician, I noticed that no matter what I was saying to him, he was only looking at my husband, right? And after about 5 minutes, and I would say something to him, and then he would repeat it to my husband, and then I would just look at my husband and be like, what is going on here? Then I was like, oh, I got it. It is this old Southern thing that women don't have a place, right? We should be at home doing, I don't know, women things, right? Cleaning dishes, cooking, or I don't know, whatever they want us to do, right? And so what I've had to learn is I will kind of give my husband a bottom line up front. We call it a bloof. And I will tell him exactly what I want him to say to these politicians. And we'll go in there and he'll introduce me, and I'm like, it's like Batman and Robin. I'm Robin because I'm a sidekick. But really, I'm the one that's like, hey, this is what we have to do. And Jason, he'll tell them. And then the politician will be like, okay. And so we've really studied people and how they respond, whether they're Democrat or Republican. It really depends on those words that you use. So we found out through a radio show that if you use the words like conservative, like conserving trees or conserving the water, some of the Republican politicians are okay with that. But when you come in there with the words environment,